The last bullet echoed through the shattered sky like a final breath of a dying world. It had been 3 years since the Great War ended, not between nations or ideologies, but between the living and the dead. The zombie plague had swept across the planet like wildfire, fueled by desperation, chaos, and fear. Governments fell. Cities burned. Families were torn apart. Yet, humanity didn't go quietly. It fought. Hard. And in the end, the dead won, but not in the way anyone expected. Now, the world was silent. Once teeming metropolises were reduced to skeletal ruins, crumbling under the weight of time and decay. Roads cracked under the sun, untended and scorched. Fields, once green with crops and livestock, lay barren and dry. Even the crows had long since vanished, leaving behind a planet with no life left to scavenge. And that's when the undead began to change. In the beginning, they were relentless, driven by hunger, feasting on anything that moved. But as time passed and humans became fewer, their prey vanished. The zombies wandered in droves at first, then scattered, their instincts failing them. Their eyes, once wide with ravenous energy, began to dull. Limbs slowed. Mouths hung open, not in rage, but in confusion. Hunger persisted, but satisfaction never came. Among them wandered a young scavenger named Elian Torres, a survivor born in the heart of destruction. He had never known a world before the outbreak. Raised in a bunker by a resistance group called the Crimson Veil, Elian had spent his formative years training to kill, both man and monster. But the war had ended, and now there was little left to fight for. At just 19, he was already a relic of a forgotten cause. He trudged through the remains of New Chicago, an empty backpack strapped over his shoulders. Glass crunched beneath his boots. Every few steps, he'd glance behind him, not in fear, but habit. The undead rarely hunted anymore. Most were too weak to move. Some just stood still in alleys or pressed their bodies against cracked windows, swaying like dead flowers in the wind. It was here, amidst the dust and echoes, that Elian found something unusual, a flicker of movement in an abandoned supermarket. He crouched low, heart thumping. Not fear, excitement. Food? Supplies? Another survivor? He crept forward, slinking past overturned carts and empty shelves, fingers brushing the grip of his machete. The silence was eerie, as if the store itself was holding its breath. A faint rustle came from the far corner near the shattered freezer section. Elian froze. And then, he heard it again. Breathing. Not the wet, raspy panting of a walker. No, this was different. Steady. Alive. He moved swiftly, silently, blade drawn, until he turned the corner and found her. A girl. Maybe 15. Dirty, barefoot, hair in matted braids. Her eyes went wide, and she raised a makeshift spear made from a mop handle and sharpened rebar. Neither moved. After a long moment, Elian raised his free hand, palm open. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "Name's Elian." The girl didn't speak, but slowly lowered her weapon. "Elia," she muttered, almost a whisper. "I thought I was the only one left." "You're not," he replied, glancing around. "But if we stay here, we might not be either." As they exited the store, something strange caught Elian's eye, a group of undead standing in a nearby parking lot, completely still. They weren't attacking. They weren't even aware of them. They were looking at each other. It was subtle, but unmistakable. One zombie twitched its head. Another mirrored the motion. It wasn't hunger, it was communication. Primitive. Silent. And unsettling. "Elia," he whispered, backing away, "I think they're changing." The girl looked at the horde and nodded grimly. "They don't eat anymore. I've seen them try, but they can't. It's like their hunger turned inward." Elian felt a chill crawl up his spine. What happens to predators when there's no prey left? What do they become? The world hadn't just survived the apocalypse. It had entered a new phase, one where the dead didn't feed, but watched, waited, evolved. and Elian had a feeling the war wasn't over. It had only changed shape. Elian and Elia moved through the ruins like ghosts, their footsteps muffled by layers of dust and decay. They didn't speak. There was too much to process, too much they didn't understand. The undead weren't what they used to be, and that terrified Elian more than anything. They headed west, navigating cracked highways and collapsed overpasses. Elian led, machete in hand, while Elia stayed close, always watching their flanks. She had survived alone for over a year, and her instincts were razor-sharp. Elian noticed how she scanned rooftops, avoided open intersections, and kept her steps light. She wasn't just surviving, she was preparing for something. After a few miles, they found shelter in a half-demolished train station. Elian boarded up what was left of the entrance and lit a small fire from old magazines and broken wood. As flames danced in the dark, Elia finally spoke. They talked to each other now. Elian looked up, frowning. "You mean grunts and groans?" She shook her head. "No. Quiet. Almost like they're thinking together." He didn't respond right away. His mind flashed back to the horde in the parking lot. Their heads tilting. Their eyes, focusing. "You've seen it too," Elia said. "Haven't you?" Elian nodded slowly. "Yeah. Just once." They weren't trying to feed. They were organizing. Silence settled between them like ash. Then Elia added something that made Elian's skin crawl. "I heard one whisper my name last week." He blinked. "What?" "I swear," she whispered. "I was hiding in a basement in South Haven. One of them came down. It didn't see me. But it stood in the doorway and whispered, 'Elia,' like it knew." "That's not possible," Elian muttered, more to himself than to her. "They're starving," she said, voice shaking. "And desperate things learn fast." The fire crackled, throwing flickering shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind howled through the hollow remains of civilization. That night, Elian couldn't sleep. His mind reeled. Zombies didn't think. They didn't talk. That was the one rule of the apocalypse. They were monsters, not minds. But now, the monsters were evolving. The next morning, they left before sunrise. They headed toward a settlement. Elian had heard rumors of Vault 10, a fortified community built inside an old hydroelectric plant deep in the woods. If anyone could explain what was happening to the undead, it would be the scientists rumored to be working there. But reaching Vault 10 meant crossing the Ash Belt, a massive region of charred cities, left over from the firebomb campaigns during the height of the war. Nothing lived in the Ash Belt, not even most of the zombies. Or so people believed. By noon, the sky was thick with smoke. Soot clung to their skin and hair. The roads disappeared into rubble. Every breath tasted like burnt metal. And that's when they saw it. A single walker, standing upright in the middle of a cracked highway. It wasn't moving. Just standing. Watching them. Elian raised his machete and stepped forward, but Elia grabbed his arm. "Wait." "What?" "Just look at it." The creature didn't groan or charge. It didn't lurch toward them. Instead, it slowly raised one arm and pointed. Not at them, but past them. Elian turned, eyes narrowing. At first, he saw nothing. Then he noticed something strange in the smoke, a shape, low and fast. "Elia, get down." A shape burst from the ash, a zombie, but different. It ran, not shuffled. Its muscles moved with purpose, and its jaw opened, not to bite, but to scream. It slammed into Elian, knocking him to the ground. The machete skidded across the asphalt. Elia screamed and drove her spear into the creature's side, but it barely flinched. Elian fought to grab anything, rock, metal, bone, but the creature was too strong. And then, the first zombie screamed too. A long, echoing wail. Immediately, more shapes appeared from the smoke, dozens of them, fast, lean, silent. "Run!" Elian yelled. They sprinted down the highway, lungs burning. The new breed of undead gave chase, moving like a pack. Coordinated. Tactical. This wasn't hunger. This was a hunt. Only when they reached the river and plunged into its freezing depths did the horde give up pursuit, stopping at the bank and watching. Just watching. Elian crawled onto the far shore, coughing and gasping. Elia collapsed beside him, shaking. "They're changing," he whispered. "No," Elia said, staring back at the still figures on the other side. "They already have." The river had spared them, for now. Elian sat on a moss-covered rock, watching the opposite bank. The horde of undead hadn't moved. They stood still, eerily still, as if obeying an invisible command. Their heads twitched occasionally, scanning. Not randomly, but methodically. Elia sat nearby, wringing out her clothes. Her eyes, usually sharp and alert, now held something new: fear. Not fear of dying. Fear of not understanding what they were up against. "These aren't just walkers anymore," Elian said, breaking the silence. "They move fast. They work together. That thing, it tackled me like a predator. Like it knew where I'd fall." Elia didn't look up. "They're not starving. They're adapting." Elian remembered the first time he saw a zombie, clumsy, desperate, clawing at anything living. Now, they were different. Precise. Focused. Evolved. He stood up and tightened the straps of his pack. Vault 10's 2 days north. If there are scientists there, they need to know about this. And if they're dead? Elia asked. Then we keep moving. But we have to try. They moved through dense woods, staying low, silent. The forest was thick with rot and silence. Birds were gone. So were insects. It was as if nature itself had recoiled from the presence of the undead. The trees stood twisted and blackened from past fires, and a faint chemical smell lingered in the air. That night, they camped in an abandoned hunting shack. Elian blocked the door with a fallen log. Elia curled up in a corner with her spear still clutched tight. They didn't talk much anymore. The silence between them was thick with dread. Just before dawn, Elian heard something. Not footsteps. Not groaning. Tapping. Soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers on glass. He stood, heart pounding, and moved to the window. Outside, barely visible in the fog, stood a single undead. Its eyes locked onto him, and its fingers tapped a pattern against the wooden wall: 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. Tap tap tap, top top, tap tap tap. Morse code. Elian stepped back. His mouth went dry. "Elia," he hissed. "Wake up." She stirred and sat up instantly, weapon raised. "One of them, it's outside. It's tapping. I think it's using code." Elia blinked. "What?" "I don't know how. But it's not random." They waited in silence. Eventually, the tapping stopped. When Elian dared to peek again, the figure was gone. No footprints. No sounds. Just fog curling through the trees. "What the hell is happening?" Elian whispered. "Their hunger's been replaced," Elia said quietly. "By thought. Maybe they're not mindless anymore. Maybe they never were." Later that day, they stumbled across something worse. An abandoned campsite, fresh. A fire still smoldered. Pots and cans scattered. No blood. No bodies. Just missing people. But in the dirt nearby, Elian found something chilling. Drawings. Scrawled in ashen soot, images had been etched into the earth, stick figures surrounded by circles. Eyes with excess through them. And at the center, a human head with jagged lines shooting from it, as if it were screaming or glowing. The lines looked like they were radiating control. "They're organizing," Elian muttered. Elia crouched beside him. "Or something's controlling them." That night, they found shelter in a derailed train lying in a ravine. Rain pounded the metal hull, and thunder shook the sky. But it wasn't the storm that woke Elian, it was the whispers. Faint at first. Dozens of them. So close. We see you. You're next. Elian sat up, blade in hand. He turned to Elia, but she was already awake, her face pale. They're here. Suddenly, something slammed against the side of the train. Then again. Then another from the opposite end. Dozens of thuds surrounded them. Elian could hear the groaning of steel, the bending of the walls. They're trying to trap us inside, he said. We have to go, now. They kicked out the emergency hatch on the roof and climbed into the rain-soaked night. From above, they saw them, the new breed. Gaunt, fast, coordinated. Eyes glowing faintly in the dark, like animals that had adapted to hunt by night. And they weren't just chasing. They were herding. The duo sprinted toward the trees, the undead on their heels, moving like wolves, flanking, circling, pushing them toward something. Elian realized it too late. A steep cliff appeared before them, hidden by the rain. They stopped just in time. Below, jagged rocks and rushing water. Behind them, the horde closed in. Trapped. Elia turned, soaked and breathless. This isn't just survival anymore, Elian. No, he said, stepping in front of her, weapon raised. This is a war. The wind howled through the cliffside as Elian and Elia stood trapped, the undead pressing closer. The new breed didn't rush, no, they waited. Patient. Precise. As if they knew the humans had nowhere left to run. Elian's grip on his machete tightened. We jump. Elia's eyes widened. We won't survive that drop. We won't survive this, either. Without another word, Elian grabbed her hand, and leapt. The fall was chaos. Rain and wind screamed past their ears. The river hit them like a wall of ice. Everything blurred. Elian surfaced once, gasping, before the current dragged him under. Darkness. Then, a hand. Elia pulled him to the bank, coughing, bruised, but alive. For a moment, they just lay there, listening to the distant growls of the horde above. They weren't following. Maybe they couldn't swim. Or maybe, they didn't need to anymore. 2 days later, battered and half-starved, Elian and Elia stood before a rusted gate marked with fading letters, V.T.10. Vault 10. Massive steel doors, thick fences, cameras, still operational. They approached slowly, hands raised. Elian banged on the outer panel. We're not infected, he shouted. Please, we need help. A voice crackled from the speaker, remove weapons. Step back 10 feet. Keep your hands visible. The gate creaked open, revealing floodlights and armed guards in makeshift uniforms. They were taken inside quickly, checked for bites, scanned, questioned. No one smiled. No one welcomed them. The mood inside was tense, more military than refuge. Vault 10 wasn't a shelter. It was a lab. Inside, Elian and Elia were led to a man named Dr. Marcus Holland, a grizzled scientist with cold eyes and a missing hand replaced by a mechanical prosthetic. He watched them with suspicion, even as he questioned them. You saw the new ones? He asked. The ones that don't rot? Elian nodded. They're faster. Smarter. Organized. Elia added, they whisper. Some even plan. Dr. Holland didn't flinch. He sighed and pulled out a folder, slapping it onto the table. Inside were grainy photos, zombies dissected, restrained, studied. Most looked ordinary. One didn't. The creature had blackened veins and wide, pupil-less eyes. Its skull was partially opened, revealing strange growths, fungus-like tendrils woven into brain tissue. We call them Type 5, Holland said. V for variant. They're not traditional infected. Something changed in them after the famine. Elian frowned. The famine? When the war ended and humanity vanished from most zones, the undead starved. Many shut down, dormant. But a handful mutated. Their hunger didn't disappear. It evolved. Became strategic. They stopped eating just for flesh, and started choosing prey. Choosing how? Elia asked, voice low. Holland leaned closer. They're selecting hosts. Not just killing anymore, recruiting. Elian's stomach twisted. You're saying they're building something? An army, Holland said darkly. But not all zombies are welcome. Only certain ones mutate. The rest are controlled. We think there's a central force behind it, a kind of alpha intelligence. The original host. We call it the Maw. Elia whispered, and where is it? That's the problem, Holland replied. We think it's moving. Growing. And learning. He stood and walked to a nearby screen. A satellite image displayed a large scorched region near the ash belt, once a city, now just a black pit. The Maw feeds off fear, memory, intelligence. It doesn't just devour flesh. It absorbs identity. And if we don't stop it, it'll become something more than human, more than dead. Elian stared. What do you want from us? Dr. Holland's eyes narrowed. You've seen the Horde. Survived direct contact. That makes you valuable. I want you to help us find a way into the Maw's territory. We need live data. Behavior patterns. Weaknesses. And what do we get in return? Elia asked sharply. Shelter. Food. And a chance to stop the end of the world, again. Later, in their assigned quarters, Elian and Elia sat in silence. We just got out of hell, Elian muttered. Now they want us to walk back into it. Elia shrugged. We were already walking that way. At least now we know what's ahead. Elian looked down at his scarred hands. If these things keep changing, what happens when they stop needing flesh entirely? What happens when they start thinking like us? Elia looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe they already are. 3 days later, they were back outside the gates. This time, not running. This time, walking into danger, with permission. Elian and Elia had been given survival gear, wrist-mounted biomonitors, and a small drone named Echo that buzzed around them, feeding visuals back to Vault 10. Their mission was simple: get close to the scorched zone marked on the satellite. Observe. Record. Stay alive. Simple, on paper. They trekked across a dead zone of ash and bone. The ground was cracked, the air tasted like rust, and the only signs of life were twisted, blackened trees that looked like they had tried to crawl away before dying. The silence was absolute. Even birds refused to fly here. We're in its shadow, Elia whispered as they crossed into what Vault 10 called the Gray Edge. Everything feels watched. Elian nodded. Like we're inside something's mouth. The drone hummed softly above them. Echo beeped occasionally, flashing red whenever it detected motion, even though nothing moved. No zombies. No wind. Just a sense of presence. By dusk, they reached a valley where the land dipped into a vast crater, charred earth, strange markings etched in scorched soil, and a ruined city at its heart. The Maw's rumored location. They made camp in the skeleton of a collapsed overpass. That night, Elian dreamt. He was walking through streets he didn't know, but they felt familiar. People passed him. Dead people. Talking, laughing, buying food. A man with no jaw handed him fruit. A child with missing eyes tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "You're not real here." He woke up gasping. So did Elia. "I saw my sister," she muttered. "She's been dead for 5 years." They stared at each other. The Maw wasn't just feeding off flesh. It was projecting something. Reaching into minds. Showing things that shouldn't be seen. The next day, they reached the outer edge of the city, black towers standing like melted candles, streets buckled and cracked. In the middle stood something horrifying, a massive spire of bone and rusted steel, grown from the earth like a tooth. It pulsed. Elian clutched his head as images flashed through his brain: death, rebirth, fire, hunger. Whispers clawed at the edge of his consciousness. This is it, he managed. This is where it begins. They activated Echo and sent it toward the spire. The drone zoomed in, capturing footage. Scores of undead gathered around the structure, kneeling in silence. It wasn't random, it was worship. And standing at the center, a figure. Not rotting. Not limping. Clothed in torn military gear. Wearing a mask made of bone and glass. Its arms were outstretched, like a priest at a pulpit. It raised one hand, and all the undead stood as one. Elia pulled Elian back behind a shattered wall. That's it. That's the Alpha. That's what Vault 10 needs. We're not done yet, Elian said. We need to know how it controls them. They slipped into a nearby structure, what used to be a subway entrance, and climbed down into the tunnels. The air thickened as they descended. Not with dust. But thoughts. Memory. Echo's lights flickered. In the dark, whispers grew louder. Why did you leave me? I still remember your screams. You were supposed to save us. They weren't hallucinating. Not anymore. Elia stumbled, gripping her ears. It's reading us. Using our guilt. Elian reached out, his voice strained. Don't listen. Focus on me. We get the data, and we get out. At the end of the tunnel, they found it, an interface. Not digital. Not human. A wall covered in pulsing veins, bones fused with cables, symbols carved in dozens of languages. A living nerve center. Elian touched it. His eyes rolled back. In a blink, he saw everything. The war. The first virus. The famine. The mutations. How the original virus didn't just kill, it preserved. Infected hosts retained fragments of memory. And in one rare case, intelligence. The Ma had once been a brilliant scientist. One who tried to cure the infection by injecting himself with a modified strain. It didn't cure. It merged. Now it was no longer man or machine or monster. It was a collective mind, and it wanted unity. Not through peace. Through consumption. He staggered back, bleeding from the nose. We have to go, he choked. It knows we're here. Echo beeped wildly. Movement, hundreds, no, thousands of undead approaching. From the tunnels. The streets. The towers. All coming to protect the core. Elia grabbed his arm. No more hiding. We run. They scrambled out of the tunnel, sprinting as the horde closed in, the earth trembling beneath their feet. Behind them, the spire pulsed harder, beating like a heart. Like it was awakening. They didn't look back. Not even when the city screamed. Elian and Elia ran through hell. Behind them, the maw howled, not with sound, but with thought. A scream inside their heads that made their vision blur and their hearts race. The ground cracked as the undead surged forward, not in mindless chaos, but in perfect unison. Like soldiers. Echo the drone zigzagged overhead, broadcasting the footage back to Vault 10. It captured everything, the rising spire, the bowing hordes, and the Alpha at the center, extending its hand as if conducting a symphony of death. The air around them grew thick, buzzing with invisible pressure. Every step felt like trudging through molasses, the maw pulling at their minds, slowing their thoughts, making them question everything. Did we make it up? Elian shouted over the sound of crumbling stone. Did we imagine it all? No, Elia hissed. This is real. And if we don't move? Something exploded in front of them. A blast from the sky. Missiles. They ducked behind a burned-out vehicle as explosions tore through the blackened city. Echo, now in defensive mode, flashed warnings. Vault 10 had seen enough. They weren't going to wait. 2 hours earlier, Dr. Holland stared at the drone feed, eyes wide with horror. The moment he saw the horde kneel and the Alpha emerge, he made the call. Strike Team Echo, prepare long-range launch. Target coordinates uploaded. The maw is real. We're not waiting for extraction. Sir, one of the technicians said cautiously, Elian and Elia are still inside the blast zone. Holland's jaw clenched. They knew the risk. A beat of silence. Then the order was given. Elian and Elia crawled through rubble, ears ringing, coated in ash. The spire still stood, though it had taken damage. The Alpha was gone, retreated, or maybe destroyed. But the undead weren't scattered. They were changing again. Bodies burned by fire simply got back up, flesh melting off, revealing something underneath. Not bone. Armor. Their skin had hardened, obsidian black, glistening, like carapace. The Maw had anticipated this. It had prepared for war. Elian gasped, clutching his side where a shard had pierced his jacket. Blood trickled down, but he kept moving. "We're not getting out through the city," Elia said, scanning their escape routes. "Too many. Too fast." "Then we go under," Elian replied, pointing to a nearby fissure in the street. A sewer tunnel, cracked open during the bombardment. It was dark, tight, and stank of rot, but it was their only chance. They slid down into the tunnel. The whispers returned instantly. Stronger. Not distant voices, but familiar ones. Elia, the voice was her sister's. "You left me." "Coward," came a voice in Elian's mind. His father's. Always running. Always afraid. They pressed on, hands gripping the damp, foul walls. Until they found a room. Not a natural part of the sewer. It looked built. Reinforced. A door sealed with strange locks, bioorganic tech, pulsing softly. Echo beeped and scanned it. A message flickered on its interface. Prototype, mem cell containment. Do not open without authorization. Elian stared. What the hell is this? Elia looked around. A lab. Underground. Pre-war tech? The door creaked open by itself. Inside was a chamber with a single tank, filled with blue fluid. Inside floated a body. Human. Or once human. The same face as the Alpha, but different. Younger. Peaceful. Echo's scanners lit up. Match found. Subject 0. Genetic origin of the Maw. Elia gasped. This is him. Before the infection. Before he changed. Elian's mind raced. If this body still exists, then the Maw's control isn't complete. It didn't absorb everything. Part of it, maybe its weakness, is still here. A sound echoed behind them. Footsteps. Not human. A creature emerged from the tunnel, part bone, part machine, glowing veins running through its limbs. It didn't charge. It watched. Waiting. Echo flew between them and emitted a high-pitched pulse. The creature shuddered, then backed away, retreating into the dark. Elia looked at the tank, breathless. That pulse, it interfered with the link. Elian stepped forward. Then we use it. We take this thing, this version of the Maw, and we break the connection. But how? Elia asked. We don't have the tech. We do now, Elian said, holding up Echo. A risky plan formed in their minds. Take Subject 0. Bring him back to Vault 10. Let the scientists extract whatever memories or codes still exist. And then, send that back into the network. Into the Maw's hive mind. Use its past self to kill its future. But first, they had to escape. And the horde was already closing in. The tunnel was their only escape, narrow, suffocating, and winding deep beneath the ruined city. But even here, the whispers of the dead followed them, crawling into their minds like ghosts of the past. Elian's heart raced as he dragged Elia forward. Echo, still functional, buzzed overhead, scanning their surroundings for threats. The creature they'd encountered in the lab, half bone, half machine, had retreated, but Elian didn't trust that it was gone. It was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. We're almost there, Elian muttered, sweat dripping down his forehead. We need to get to the surface. We need to get back to Vault 10. Elia nodded, her face pale but determined. If we can get Subject Zero to them, maybe we can finally understand how to stop the maw. This thing, it can't be allowed to grow any stronger. They turned a corner, and the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. In the center stood a set of iron doors, old, rusted, but intact. A faint light flickered from the cracks between them. "We're close," Elian said, but just as he reached for the door, a low growl echoed through the chamber. Elian froze. Elia's eyes widened. A figure stepped from the shadows. It was the creature they had seen before, its body warped and twisted, its glowing veins now pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. This time, though, it wasn't alone. Behind it, 100 more figures emerged, zombies, but different. The bone-armored creatures moved in eerie unison, their hollow eyes glowing with the same strange light as the leaders. Elian started, but it was too late. The creatures surged forward, faster than they'd ever seen. They moved with purpose, their steps synchronized like a tidal wave. The horde wasn't just following. They were protecting something. Or someone. The maw. The Alpha had found them. Elian pushed Elia toward the doors. "Go! I'll hold them off." Elia hesitated, but the look in his eyes was enough. She turned and sprinted for the door, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Behind her, Elian fought to hold his ground. His machete flashed in the dim light, cutting through the bone-armored creatures as they advanced. They didn't bleed, no, they cracked, like dry clay, as he struck, but still they came. Faster. Stronger. The creature in the front, the one that had been watching them, stepped forward, its eyes glowing brighter. It raised one hand, and the others paused, waiting for its command. Then it spoke. Not in words, but in thoughts. "You should have stayed out of this. You should have remained silent." Elian's head snapped back, the words echoing in his mind like a hammer blow. His vision blurred, his body trembling as if the very air around him was thickening, pressing in. He shook his head, trying to block out the voices, but they only grew louder, more insistent. "You're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to remember." The maw's influence was deep, almost suffocating. He could feel it, threading its way through his thoughts, pulling at memories he hadn't realized were still there. It was the same feeling he had when he first touched the chamber, an invasion. An invasion that had started with him. And then he remembered. Subject Zero. His hand shot out, gripping the strap of his pack where the small device containing Subject Zero's data was secured. That was the key. That was what had caused the maw to react, to come for them. If they could take that data to Vault 10, it could be the end of it. But first, they had to survive. Elian swung his machete again, slicing through another of the bone-armored creatures. He didn't have time to think about what was happening to his mind. Not yet. There would be time for that later. Right now, his focus was on one thing, protecting Elia. Elia was at the door now, fingers fumbling as she tried to pry it open. The sound of Elian's fighting was muffled behind her, but she didn't dare look back. She knew what was happening, knew that if they didn't leave now, they wouldn't get out at all. With a final push, the door gave way, creaking open to reveal the surface beyond, a desolate wasteland of ash and fire. "Elian!" Elia screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the howling winds. "I'm right behind you." Elian's voice rang out, though it was ragged, strained. She turned to see him, a blur of motion, fighting his way through the oncoming horde. His machete flashed in the light, cutting down the bone-armored creatures one after another. The maw's voice echoed in her mind, too, but she didn't listen. She couldn't afford to. Elian reached her, breathless but determined. He grabbed her arm. "We need to move. Now." Together, they ran through the door, out into the storm. The wind was fierce, and the ground was unstable, but they kept moving, faster than they ever had before. Behind them, the maw's army slowly began to retreat, their eyes watching, waiting for the next command. Elian didn't dare look back. The storm howled around them as Elian and Elia stumbled across the barren wasteland, their feet dragging through the ash-filled air. Every step was heavy, each breath harder to take, but they couldn't afford to slow down. The Maw wasn't just a threat to their survival, it was a threat to everything that remained of humanity. Behind them, the ruins of the city loomed like a sleeping giant, its dead eyes watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. "Elian, we need to do this now." Alia's voice was almost lost in the wind, but the urgency in her tone was clear. "We can't outrun it forever." Elian nodded, clutching the small device that contained the data from Subject Zero. It was their only hope. Vault 10 needed this information, needed to understand how to sever the Maw's control over the undead. But they still had a long way to go before they could reach safety. The data was their last hope, the final key to stopping the Maw's expansion. If they could just get it back to Vault 10, maybe, just maybe, they could break the cycle. But first, they had to survive. They reached the edge of the wasteland, where the dark horizon met the ruins of old buildings. Far off in the distance, the faint flicker of Vault 10's emergency beacon shone like a dying star. It felt miles away, but it was their only destination. "You think they're ready?" Elia asked, her voice strained. Elian didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. The Maw was more than just a physical threat. It was a mind, an intelligence that was growing stronger with every passing minute, every new mind it claimed. And they were running out of time. Before he could speak, a shadow passed overhead. He looked up. The creature from the lab, the bone-armored entity, was soaring above them, flanked by hundreds of others. They were fast, but more importantly, they had learned from their mistakes. The Maw was adapting to their every move. It had been waiting for them to think they could escape. "We're not going to make it," Elia whispered. "We will," Elian said, though his voice was strained. "We have to." With one last glance at the distant beacon, Elian turned to Elia. "Get to Vault 10. I'll hold them off." "No," Elia snapped. "We stay together. Always." She was right. There was no running. Not now. They sprinted toward the beacon together, their legs pumping through the dust, their hearts pounding in their chests. But as they ran, the world seemed to collapse around them. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the sky above darkened, the Maw's influence spreading like a storm. The bone-armored horde landed in front of them, encircling the two survivors with terrifying precision. The leader of the creatures, the one that had watched them, waited for them, stepped forward, its glowing eyes narrowing as it locked onto Elian. And then, it spoke, its voice cutting through their minds like a blade. "You can't outrun what you've already become. The dead are only the beginning. You are already inside me." Elian felt his stomach twist, his mind nearly splitting in two as the Maw's consciousness tried to force its way in. But he couldn't, he wouldn't, give in. "We're not done yet," Elian whispered through clenched teeth. He reached into his bag, pulling out the device that held the key to the Maw's control. "You want us? You'll have to deal with this first." He activated the device. A signal shot into the sky, a pulse of data that cut through the air like a beacon. The Maw's influence wavered. The creatures around them recoiled, their glowing eyes flickering. In that instant, Elian and Elia made their move. They dashed toward the Vault 10 beacon, their last chance at survival. The creatures began to move again, but the pulse had done its job. The Maw's connection was weakening, its hold on the undead faltering. Elia pulled Elian toward the vault entrance, her hand tight around his wrist. They were almost there. But just as they reached the door, the ground trembled one final time. The Maw had one last trick. The earth cracked open beneath their feet. From the chasm, a towering figure emerged, a monstrous being made entirely of the undead, bone, and twisted metal. The Maw itself. It was the Alpha, the one who had once been human, the mind behind the hive. It had come to claim them, to absorb their minds and make them part of the collective. But Elian wasn't going to let that happen. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. With a roar, he activated the last of the data from Subject Zero. The pulse surged, blasting outward like a wave of light. The Maw screamed, its form warping and twisting in the face of the signal. Elian collapsed to his knees, the strain too much. But Elia was already pulling him inside the vault, her voice frantic. "We did it! Elian, we..." The doors slammed shut behind them. The Maw's roar was cut off in an instant. Inside, the vault was silent. The nightmare was over. For now. But Elian knew one thing: the war wasn't won. Not yet. The end.